I'm excited to introduce Barnaby Clay, writer-director, who has completed his first feature narrative, a psychological horror film, The Seeding. Welcome, Barnaby.
Hi, Tammy.
So I am so excited to dive into your film. Number one, it was like a spiraling rabbit hole of fear and isolation. And I felt like the music design and composition only enhanced the creepiness and the unsettling feeling I had, in particular in the opening scene with that baby. And was that your child?
No, that was my my child's a bit older. That is my very close friend, production designer extraordinaire, KK Barrett. That's his grandson, actually, funnily enough.
Wow. I mean, that was just bringing you into the creepiness of this film. What was that baby eating?
The finger, but it was a prosthetic finger, which was basically between every take, it was like doused in honey. So that kid, Bowie is his name, was having a whale of a time. He was loving it. He was. We really didn't want to give that finger up at the end of the day.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was created like it was. At first I was thinking, I wonder if they made like the carrot look like the finger. I knew it was a finger, but I just didn't know if it was like an edible thing that he was eating that was in the shape of a finger.
We had one built. This very brilliant practical effects designer, Vincent Giustini, he designed the finger, and he gave me a few fingers, but obviously we had to try and build them with the knowledge that, the little baby was going to be chewing on it, and it couldn't be toxic, so he had to kind of veer away from certain things that he usually uses and stick to things which are a bit more, just like non-toxic. And
just the close-up of that baby, it was just so chilling. And then the baby out in the field, it was kind of like, oh my God, like who's watching this kid? But it just like led you into this world that I found. And again, I go back to the music was so well done. I mean, it just brought out the freakiness. Every time it's like, oh, the eerie music bringing me even deeper into this hole that this guy was in. Yeah. So maybe we should just start with, well, what is the film? And I know that it took you a while to write, around 8 years. I had read that it took you to write this. And, sometimes when I read about that, I was thinking, well, a lot of projects do take a while to, write and get made. And I know that sometimes life can take over. What was your process writing it? Did you conceive the idea and know from start to finish what it was going to be about, or was it an evolution to get to where it was today?
I mean, I usually write a pretty fleshed out treatment to start off with, which is like the template that I build the script from, and that's maybe anywhere between 20 and 30 pages, and it's really kind of boring and plodding to read it because it's basically it's the story beats, without any of the character and without any of the dialogue. So it's got no real life to it, but at the same time, it's just a really great blueprint, which I can then take and then start. Okay, this is the scene. Let's make it a real scene, So that's how I generally work. This was, it was 9 years from now, basically. It's released to when I came up with the idea. But I should say, like, within that process, I was finishing something else. I did other projects in the meantime. There was a different iteration of this film that was going to be shot for more money. And back in, I guess, 2019, 2020, which all fell apart. And so, then I had to rebuild it. So it's not a clear cut, not like I spent 9 years just in front of my laptop working away on that script. But, certainly within that time, it's constantly changing, and the script was constantly changing right up until the edit was done. I mean, the scene we're talking about of the baby at the very beginning was not in the script. It was not in the shooting script even. It was something which came in post-production when we were editing, and we just felt like I'd already always had this sequence in the script of my character driving out of the city, heading into the wilderness. And it's kind of a classic setup for a horror movie, leaving the world behind him. And, you know, you get a bit of character. He's talking to people at his office or his family members. And then there he is in the wilderness. But I never really wanted to do that. That was something that I was kind of pushed towards by my producers, really. And, but we just never had the time or the money to do it. But I felt like I wanted something at the front of the film that kind of led you into this world. And I was just looking for I just wanted an idea which was very upfront, very like extreme, and something that hopefully I'd never seen before, and something that if I was sitting in a cinema and the lights went down and I saw that, I would feel like, okay, yeah, I'm into this ride. Wherever it's taking me, I'm going, you know. So that was my feeling, and so came up with the idea of this child walking through the desert, chewing on a finger
alone.
Just felt like, yeah, that's never gonna, you know. At that point, you're either in this film or you're out. You can walk out the room at that point, or you can stay and kind of get into it. So that was, and yeah. So anyway, long story short.
No, I love it. Like, how did the story change? I know that you had a different budget from, you know, in 2019, then the pandemic hit, and then you had to restructure. You even recasted as well.
Yeah.
So what
yeah.
changed in the script from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic than what I saw? Was anything different in the conception of it?
Not hugely, no. I mean, the main thing which was different, basically, so I had a conversation with my producer. I'd spent much of the early days of the pandemic trying to shop the script around again to try and rebuild the financing. I was having a really tough time, lots of doors closing, which had previously been open, but I think there was a shift in the mentality of financing at that point, like during the pandemic, where suddenly, because everything got so extreme, everybody was just a little bit more careful about what they were going to spend money on. And they read this script and they were like, yeah, it's cool, we really like it, but it's a bit weird, and, you know, it's horror, but it's not really horror, it's kind of arty as well, and like, do we want to get maybe... Everybody came out of the pandemic with a bit more, like, hands back on that point, you know, they were just, like, not quite so willing to get behind it, so, and I spoke to my producer, I was like, we have to get this made somehow, do you think we can do it for half the amount of money? Which basically went from, we were looking at around 3 to 4 million, and but then I said to him, it's not even half. I just said to him, well, look, is there any way we could do this for like $1 million, basically? Because I feel like there's a number that, you know, through people I know and production companies, whatnot, I just felt like that was a realistic amount, and any lower than that would just be impossible to make the film. So he said yes, and then I said, well, what should do I need to go back to the drawing board, you know, and rebuild this? And he said, let's try and shoot what we can. Let's try and shoot it all. And because we weren't really sure what we were dealing with this under the circumstances, and, you know, it was only really when we were there, after like 2 days really of shooting, or even a day of shooting, that it became apparent that we were not going to make the film that the script had written out. It was there was a lot more going on in it. There were a lot more elements that we just couldn't get. We had to, I had to rethink it all, you know, and I spent most of all of my free time actually just doing that, basically rewriting. Like every single minute that I wasn't on set, or sleeping at night, I was rewriting the film. And there was a lot of small scenes that we lost or like we shot, but they were kind of watered down versions that we ended up using. But the main big difference was the ending. There was a completely different ending, and it was a much more convoluted, involved piece with stunts and with all the kids and kind of thing, which would, take a larger like Hollywood production unit, like a week or more to shoot, maybe a couple of weeks even, and we really had it scheduled for like a day, and we're like, forget it, this is going to be impossible, there's no way. So I had to really go back to the drawing board there, and luckily I had this other ending, which is the ending which is in the film, which was actually my very, very first ending that I'd written in the first draft of the script. But I just felt it was too bleak and it wasn't right for some reason. And so I wrote this other ending, and then, but then in this situation, I went back to it and I was just like, it is bleak, but it's actually really what is supposed to happen. It's like, this is the ending that it's always been and it always should have been. And I don't know what I was thinking about trying to do that other version of it. It's crazy. And so that was what happened. But that was the most substantial change, really.
Yeah. I didn't even think about that as a writer-director, that you might have to rewrite some things in production, and that you just said, and wow, I mean, that just puts a lot more pressure on you too, because did you feel like when you had to write in your off time to rework some things to make the shooting, how many days were the shooting days?
We shot for 18. Well, we budgeted for 18 days. We took a 19th day because we just had to, and when we were there, but it was like a kind of skeleton crew day. Sent most of the crew off, and then just tried to do what we can on that last day. But yeah, I mean, it was probably the biggest learning curve for me, actually, was just like, I've been involved in film in one way or another for 20 years, doing music videos, commercials, and short films and documentaries, everything really. And nothing had ever prepared me for that lesson, which was just like, oh, if you're a writer and the director, it's up to you. If something's not working in the script, or you've run out of time and these 5 scenes now need to become 2 scenes, then it's up to you and nobody else. And it was a nightmare because of that. It really is. It's like, I mean, I was on set writing whilst the lighting department was setting up the next shot. I was, like I said, we shot 6-day weeks, and on the 7th day, everybody went. It was beautiful. We were down in Kanab in Utah, and it's stunning around there, and everybody was going off hiking and having a really nice day off. And I was just sat in this motel room, just literally like just tearing my hair out, and kind of, I had a few friends I would call. I had one who's a writer. I'd call him, who was familiar with the script. I had my editor back here in LA, and also obviously familiar with the script, and also some of the rushes that were coming in, and so I talked to them about it, talked to my producer about it, but ultimately, it was up to me, and I never had a moment outside of this film to not think about this film at that time. I mean, I don't know how many directors do anyway, really, but certainly your inclination when you run into these problems is just like, oh, can somebody call the writer and get them to sort this out? And I'm like, oh no, that's me. Okay, all right, I got to do it. So big lesson learned there.
Yeah, but the movie, the way that you put it all together, really worked, and especially the lead character, Scott Hayes, the spiral he was going down in this, just the isolatedness of the place that he went down into and was stuck in, and then in the progression of where he went mentally in this, just with this woman, he doesn't know what's going on, and, going down this rabbit hole, to the near the end scene. I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to blow it, but God,
Yeah.
I was thinking for the last couple months, it'd be like, oh my God, that would be awful. But do you want to just tell us a little bit about what the film is about, since we've just been kind of talking about it this way?
Yeah, again, without giving too much away, it's about a man city dweller, who goes out to the desert one day to take some photos of a solar eclipse. On his way home, he meets a young boy who has lost his parents, and he's quite distraught, and he offers to give him some help. The boy leads him further into the desert and then basically runs off and leaves him alone and lost. And our lead character, Wyndham Stone, stumbles around the desert, eventually finding a woman who lives in a house at the bottom of a canyon. And he decides to descend a ladder to go into this canyon and spend the night with her. And then she's very nice and non-threatening, I should say. A little odd, but non-threatening. He wakes up the next day and to discover that the ladder that he descended into this canyon has gone. And he realizes that he's, along with her, like captive in this canyon. There is no other way out. It's just a giant crater in the desert. And then he realizes that they're both kind of captives of these sadistic boys, which the earlier kid is a part of. And these boys live on the ridge to kind of basically torture and mess with these grown-ups down below. But, soon he begins to realize that there's something deeper going on, which he's not quite aware of, obviously. So that's the story. It's really survivalist horror. I wouldn't call it horror. It's like a sort of horror thriller or something like that. But it's really, talking about the canyon. It's really, from the very beginning, was the third character, really. It's like the third main character in this film. It's so obviously the whole film takes place there. It ends up being, you get these kids up on top, but for the most part, it's almost like a play is two-hander between him and this woman. When we were searching for it, we had to find somewhere which both visually worked for us and obviously worked on a practical level. And we searched all over the world, and then we found this place down in southern Utah, which seemed to be, served our purposes. It still was massively difficult, but...
Yeah, and those kids... Those feral kids were amazing. Yeah. I mean, just the looks, that the costume design, the makeup. How was it working with children? Were any of them over 18? I mean, some were younger, but
I think the oldest one was over 18. Yeah, Alex, who plays Corvus. But the rest of them, they're younger. The youngest was. Harrison, who plays the little boy, and he was like 6 or something like that when we were shooting. We also had, we had our kind of key boys who were like the main boys, and then we had a lot of like extras as well, which were generally came from Kanab, actually, for the most part. They're just like local kids who came in, and we'd bring them in for some of the shoots where we wanted more kids. I was kind of hoping to have more most of the time, but we had what we could get basically and what we could afford. But it was great. I mean, the thing is, working with these kids, they are like they're all from all over America, and they've never really been, none of them have been in a film before. And so they were so excited, and kind of like, not just excited to be in a movie, but to be in a kind of horror movie where they get to play this band of evil kind of kids. It's just like, I think for most young boys, like a real dream come true.
Yeah.
You get to be a bit nasty and get to be, kind of bullies and whatnot. It's just, I don't know, they really had a ball doing it, and they were so fun and so up for it, and it was hard. They were working nights as well. Like, some of them, I remember, the littlest kid, Harrison, just when we were doing some of the night shoots, he would kind of fall asleep, and then we'd kind of wake him up and bring him over. And I felt so bad because I got a son the same age, and it was just like, but he was so sweet and up for it. And the important thing for me was trying to get some kids who, because I saw a lot of kids who, and a lot of the children you get on these casting tapes are, you know, theatre kids, and they're very polished, and polished not in a kind of good way, but in a more like slightly theatrical way, and they look very nice. And I remember this one situation with one of the kids that I cast. I just remember he was just cast for like a background part, but he had these like really screwed up teeth, you know, and I was like, oh, I love this kid's teeth, you know. I'm gonna have a field day with them. And then he arrived on set and he had braces, and I was just like, oh my God, what have you done?
Oh no.
I had to shoot him with his mouth closed the whole time, because there's no way this kid would have braces in this movie. But yeah, I wanted to give them you know, not just a look, but also a character, you know, like each of them had their character, each of the main kids anyway, and they knew who they were. They weren't just like evil kid number 1 or evil kid number 2. They were like, you know, this is the kind of like one who's like in age-wise in the middle, but kind of like in superiority-wise, he's kind of at the top, you know, because he's a bit smarter and a bit more scheming, and, you know, just like they all had certain quirks to them, and they knew it, and when they arrived on set, they had their characters down. They had one of the things I did was I got my cousin who did the soundtrack we were talking about. There are these chants in the film. These kids do this kind of very primordial chant, and they have different versions of it, and we had to teach them to them. And because I didn't have a lot of time to work with the kids before they got on set, so I had Tristan, my cousin, do these like sessions with them near the motel we were staying in, where they would basically, they would meet up for like 3 or 4 hours. They would learn these chants and bond, and it was really important. Actually, it was because when they arrived on set, they knew each other. They knew each other's characters. They knew each other, their characters, and also their real person. So they could, you know, they enjoyed each other, and that really helped. So yeah.
No, I thought that they definitely each had their distinct personalities, like you're saying. Definitely. The other thing is, just the other day, I mean, this film has been just lingering in my mind, and I was thinking, God, I would love a seating too, but this time we're with the kids, and what's going on up there at the camp, you know, and how are you know like luring the next one down or something. But I mean, just like, how do they live? Who's taking care of them? Is it just the boys?
Well, we have, you know, I mean, I know all the answers to those questions, because, you know, you have to know the world that you're delving into. I did go into it more. There was some stuff shot which I didn't end up using, and maybe it didn't work so well or whatever, but there was some stuff which kind of did give a little bit more of a glimpse into their world. There was one shot, it was a single tracking shot through their kind of like, we called it their lair, which was essentially just like a kind of rabbit hole tunnel. And it kind of moved through the tunnel when they were asleep, and they're all fast asleep, and in there with them is like, you know, some like rotting bodies, and also like, you know, the cave walls are like covered in blood and feces, but there's also like piles of clothes in one corner, because they just like, you know, that's where they keep their clothes. There's like wrappers of food, you know, there's a little campfire. Basically, I didn't see them as like feral children, like completely off the grid. I mean, she lives off the grid. They are kind of, in my mind, they are the on the border, you know, they go between the worlds, you know, like as in their world is there with her, but it's also out like scavenging, you know, they scavenge for the guys, you know, they brought him in, but they also go out. Every bit of furniture or you see in her place has all come from them. They'll be walking along the highway, and they'll see some abandoned sofa or something, and they'll pick it up and drag it down and drop it down into the canyon, or go and like, you know, find some clothes in the back of a dumpster in the back of a gas station or something. You know, that's where they get their, you know, it's all, I wanted it to be like rooted in reality. Like there's some version of this could exist somewhere, you know. That was my thought.
Yeah, no, that's really great that I got to get the backdrop of it, because
Yeah.
I was thinking, what's going on? So now I know.
Yeah.
I know that you had a bigger budget, or were looking for a bigger budget, and then you had casted a crew, and then you had to recast. Is this because of the money you had to recast?
It was mainly to do with the pandemic, basically. It was all to do with the pandemic. It was, I had an English actor cast as in the lead, and he had a project which was basically another very big project. It was a British TV show, and it was, I guess, because of the pandemic, his whole schedule shifted. And so when we were looking to shoot, once we finally got our $1 million and we were like ready to go and shoot, that TV show had shifted and into that place. So we had to wait. He was still really wanted to do it, but we would have had to wait like another, I don't know, 6 months, and lost that opportunity. And then the actress I've been talking to is actually Romanian, and I really loved her work, and she's so interesting. And but again, what happened was, like, during the pandemic, it became the things that got very hard with obviously traveling, but also like visas and stuff like that. It just became, I think we could afford to get the visa and do all the paperwork in the original budget, but then when the budget got halved, it just became a impossibility. So yeah, could have had an Englishman and a Romanian woman in the lead role, which would have been very different. But yeah, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. So after filming, you get the film done. Your editor is working on the dailies, and was he starting to edit the film as you were going, and you were seeing cuts, or how does it work with you and the editor? How do you work with the editor?
My editor, Stuart Reeves, who's a wonderful editor, he was putting stuff together whilst I'd storyboarded, so he had a kind of rough idea, even though obviously the storyboard ends up being very different to what I shoot. Ultimately, most of the time, I use storyboards really just as a kind of comforting blueprint that I can turn to if I'm too frazzled to think about what else to do, you know.
Right.
I just like try and act more in the moment when I'm there, but like, you know, sometimes it's good to just have a starting point, you know. So that's what I use the storyboards for, or actually just a shot list. I don't think I storyboarded the whole film, but I shot listed it. And so he had that, so he could, you know, essentially start putting stuff together. And he would, it was, we had this idea that, yeah, he would put stuff together, and then, you know, in this beautiful ideal world, he would ring me up and say, this scene's great, but, you know, it'd be great if you could catch like another close-up of, you know, Alina reacting to him to this line or something like that, or just a close-up of him picking up a cup and whatever, you know, these kind of things. And that was the idea. But obviously we fell so quickly, so far behind schedule that, like, there was just no chance of any of that happening. So unfortunately, he kept on ringing me up saying that, and I was just like, Stuart, sorry, I can't. I wish I can. And, you know, and he made this list, and we kept that list, and if we ever got a chance to do anything, we would try and grab it, you know. Some of it kicked over into, we had a 2-day pickup shoot about 8 months later here in Los Angeles, just outside of Los Angeles. We got some of those things that he was asking for there, but really we were doing kind of we were doing some more. I mean, we left, because we left Utah with like really sad, and, you know, it felt pretty sad, because I felt like I'd left with a 80% finished film or something. Like we literally had scenes where like half the scene was shot, but the other person's coverage we had none of, and we had to make these really difficult calls when we were there in Utah on that final day of like, well, okay, this is a shot of Scott and it's just got ground behind him, desert earth. Let's get that in LA, So we really had some like, it was that kind of a situation where you're really picking the most important shots for that final day, the ones which like we know like involved the shack or involved these things that we could never get again, or something which was just like so specific to that location that couldn't be got in LA. But yeah, so it was kind of and then when I got back, he had an assembly, but I was in such a bad state that I didn't really want to see it for about 2 weeks. It's just like, my wife was really, actually, she was instrumental in telling me not to see it, just wait until you're like rested and kind of able to, look at it with a bit clearer eyes, which I did. And that really helped. But it was still awful watching it. I've got to say it was awful. And it just had all these big gaps in, and slowly we began to, piece it together in the edit. And Stuart is by day, he's really a commercials editor, an extremely successful, brilliant award-winning commercials editor, which allowed him to basically do my film for not, for a very reasonable rate, basically. He could afford it because he would, it was a passion project for him. He would go off, he would go and edit some Apple commercial, make a lot of money, and then come back and spend 3 weeks with me. So, which was actually worked out pretty well, because it was in that time when he was off doing commercials, I would have time to reflect and look at it and say, okay, well, maybe this scene needs some work, or maybe that scene. And then, by the time we finished shooting in November and then of 2021, and then 2022, by about, I think it was May, that was when we did our reshoot and our pickups, those 2 days of pickups. And we had a really solid list of exactly what we needed at that point. And we even had like these little, up until then, we had these awful like shots of Scott in his garden wearing a baseball cap here in LA, just like doing his lines. So we had something to work with, in the edit.
Yeah.
And it's always so gratifying when you take those out and put the real shots in.
And it still works.
Yeah. You just need it for timing, and it's important to get that, and just, but it's painful when you're watching it.
Yeah. Are you happy with the completed film?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I watched this documentary on George Lucas making Star Wars. It was actually the documentary on Industrial Lights and Magic, and the first one is really about him making Star Wars. And they could never understand why he was just so like glum about it all, considering he'd made this incredible world-changing film. And he said, well, all I really see is the sticky tape and the band-aids holding the whole thing together. And like, my answer is, I did the best I could under the conditions. That's what I feel. I feel like I did the best. I made the best film I could under those conditions. And I'm happy. I am happy with that. I'm happy that like essentially what I was going to get, even though there was so much, I mean, you lose so much. There's so much lost from the script. There's so much lost in translation. There's so much lost in budget. And, all these things that kind of you have to get your head around. Like ultimately, I'm happy that what is still there is at the heart of it what I was going for, which was that the atmosphere and the feelings that I wanted to evoke, and some of the subjects I wanted the film to tackle it's still in it, and it's still very much a part of it. And I feel really thankful for that, you know. And I'm just, you know, like, I'm just amazed that, I mean, when I left Utah, I was just like, complete disaster. You know, so you're just like, when you finally finish it, I think it was in New York when I was doing the final grade color process at Harbor in New York, and I was just watching it, and finally it looks like the film. I did the sound mix, you know, and so that was the moment where you've got the color is done, the sound mix is done. This is the final moment, and you're looking at it and you're like, wow, okay, yeah, this is it. This is great. You know, it's actually awesome. And so, yeah, I am.
That's good. I mean, I thought it was well done. And this is your first narrative, right?
Right.
I mean, you did documentary, you've done music videos. I thought for her first film, it was really good.
Yeah.
And again, I got to say, the acting, the story, and the sound design, the music composition, sound design really brought it to another level.
Yeah. Completely.
What derailed the shooting schedule?
I mean, many things, really. It just, I think maybe some of the people I had on the crew were just like not quite right in terms of just weren't quite the right people for the job, you know. Okay. Weren't quite flexible, didn't have I had to make a million compromises, and there were certain people there who just didn't really want to compromise their vision, and that made it very hard, and things slowed down a lot. The place was extremely hard to shoot in. It's one of those stories where, like, and you know, I think for the most part, just shooting is impossible anyway, but like, this was one of those things where like everything which could have gone wrong went wrong, you know. For example, we had one like very windy, muddy off-road path through this canyon to get into the location, and it was about a 15-20 minute ride along that. And about a week before we shot, snow came down, and which is really mysteriously early for that to happen there in Utah. It's just like a month early, just this random snow fell. And it was a big snow, and it looked beautiful. But as the snow melted, it just melted what road there was away. So we just basically had to rebuild the road, and we spent the whole entire film rebuilding that road. You know, it was just like, so just on a fundamental level, you're dealing with stuff like that. And then I remember at one point being on the on this cherry picker with my DP, and we were like shooting the kids, and they're up there and they're all harnessed in on the side of this ridge, and my DP lines up the shot, spends a while lining up the shot, gets it right. Then there's some other stuff going, final checks happening, and then we're just about to shoot, and then he's just like, hang on a second, I got to reframe, you know. And I'm like, what's going on? This is weird. And this happened like 3 or 4 times until we just suddenly realized that the cherry picker was broken and the hydraulics had bust, and the whole thing was just slowly going down.
Oh, no.
With us in it, with us and the camera in it. I mean, very slowly, but just enough to like literally by the moment we're about to shoot, the frame had totally gone. So we had to get this cherry picker out, and then that broke down on the road and stayed there for about 3 days, the only road we had, and we had to like bring all the equipment around it. It was just like, you know, also it was hot during the day, desert conditions, hot during the day, extremely cold at night. We're on a very small crew, so everybody's working really hard and but overworked really, long days. Everything just took longer than expected. And, you know, I had to lose a lot of scenes. Like I said, you know, it was just one of those shoots, basically. It was extremely, I mean, I really felt when I left, I can never do this ever again. And actually it was when we did the pickups. In fact, before we did the pickups, I did this one afternoon in the desert, with not the DP actually. It was a friend of mine who was a DP who I just drafted in at the last minute because he lived around the corner from me and had a camera. But to go and shoot the baby from the beginning, we're like, let's go and shoot that. I want to do that. And I got that. I did that with this DP and with my cousin who did the music. It was the three of us and a makeup artist and the little baby and his parents, and that was basically it. And I remember doing that day, and you're like, never worked with kids and babies and all that kind of stuff, but like, it was just so fun. And I remember leaving that day, and I was just like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, filmmaking could be fun too. You know, I've forgotten it could be really fun, and so it kind of restored my love of it. And then we did those pickup days, and they were a lot smoother because we knew what we wanted, and it was just easier. We were, you know, you take a risk when you decide to shoot in the middle of nowhere. That's the thing, and you don't have much money. You take a risk, and also we wanted a completed film that, even though it's low budget, didn't feel like a low budget. It doesn't feel like you're not aware of the limitations that the filmmakers had, you know, and kind of it feels, you know, hopefully you should watch it and feel like, well, that's the kind of budget, and they, you know, it's whatever budget they had, it's right for it, you know,
right?
Not, you shouldn't be walking away thinking, oh God, that wobbly set or whatever, you know, that terrible acting, or, you know, you just want to kind of get the most out of it. So anyway, yeah,
it was beautifully shot. What did you shoot on? What camera?
The Alexa.
Okay, and then was this edited in Avid?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm always kind of curious what people use to do feature films.
Yeah. It was Avid, and shot Alexa. We shot, like I said, we shot the scene with the baby and a few little pickup shots. The other shots we shot, I have like I said, this friend, this DP who lives around the corner, and he has his own camera. He has a red. And I spoke to my colorist, and I was like, are you confident that we can get these to match? And he was like, yeah, sure. You know, so it was just kind of perfect because Matthew Chung is his name. He lives around the corner, and I could just call him up the last minute and get these little things done, these little extra little things like I wanted. Like we did shots of the moon, you know, which were taken from his roof in Echo Park around the corner from me. And then also we did all the plate shots that are used with the titles throughout, the intertitles.
Yes.
The plate of rotting food. That was all shot in my shed in my garden. And I had this, and it was a great luxury being able to do that, because I had this, I wanted to do this idea of showing time passing in a very visual way, and I just love this idea of seeing this almost like still life of a plate of food. There's a quail, there's some onions, carrots, and mushrooms, I think, and it's on this nice plate. And I've shot it quite formally, and basically we're watching this as it rots throughout the film, and it's used as the titles throughout the film just to show the passing of time. And I just had this plate, and I'd bring it out. I kept it in a Tupperware container, and I'd bring it out once every 3 weeks, and then I would like call up my my friend Matthew and be like, "You gotta get over here now. The maggots have hatched." And so we'd spend like, I don't know, just an hour shooting these shots of the maggots. Then he'd go off, and then we'd, you know, I'd call him up in another 3 weeks with the next stage of the rotting of the food.
Yeah, no, I thought that was brilliant, and also to play into the beginning scene of him shooting the eclipse, and also the monthly cycles,
Yes.
you know, everything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I mean, it was, again, that was something, those titles, which are, I should say, for your listeners, we used the phases of the moon, the almanac phases of the moon. So Harvest Moon or Beaver Moon or Sturgeon Moon, Blue Moon. Again, these weren't written in the script. This was when we were editing, and we just felt like we needed to show we needed a better demarcation of time passing than what I'd shot, basically. And we talked about various options, and it was actually Stuart, my editor, who was like, what about moon phases? And I was like, yeah, that's just like great, because the names are so fabulous, but also more than anything, it just tied so perfectly into everything else and into all the themes in the film. And so, yeah, it was just one of those kind of, again, the story is always being remade and remolded as it goes along. It's just like you're constantly changing, and you need to, as a filmmaker, be like open to that change.
Well, and also stepping outside the box of time.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's what again, that's what, when you ask me, like, am I happy with the film? Like, I'm happy that I managed to get some sense of my voice as a filmmaker through. That's really what you hope for, is like, and actually, honestly, when I came back from Utah, that's what I felt most unhappy about. I felt like, because when you're shooting low budget under such time constraint, you have your list, your shot list, and you just feel like, for the most part, you're just crossing these shots off, and you're like, when do I ever get to just have fun and experiment and just like play in the sand pit, and just like enjoy it? But so I did feel a little bit like that when I came, but then slowly, you begin to see, well, actually, I did manage to get that, and I did manage to get that, and then also with these other little things, like going off into my shed and doing those things that, they kind of, that's when I really enjoy those moments, actually, when you can just, I mean, I'm also aware that as a filmmaker, it's very rare that you get the chance to do that. And I felt like the one good thing that this situation, good advantage of being low budget and not really having, we didn't really have like a production company like banging down our door during the edit, to get this finished. So I had a bit of time to go and think about it. Like I said, when Stuart was off editing commercials, I had time to think about it, but also like maybe shoot some other stuff, go and shoot the moon, go and take a day out to the desert and shoot some rocks and some spiders crawling around or whatever, just, I didn't want this film to just be driven by the narrative, but also to use the, what's essentially like B-roll to like build the atmosphere.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also, I mean, I say be proud of yourself, because for all the problems, you completed a film that looks really beautiful, and
Yeah.
a lot of times people get stuck and don't even finish the film. So, I mean, I mean, I've been on a couple of those. So
yeah, no, 100%, yeah, and that's the thing. When you get to the end, you're like, wow, I did it. And like I said, it was very disheartening leaving. It was just, I think the hardest thing was when we left Utah was just that the feeling, like where was the art? Where did I get to create all that fun stuff on the side? But not just that, it was the fact that like we left with, like 85% of a movie or something like that. How we were missing some like key scenes that we needed. And so actually we had to raise some financing after, when we were in the edit. We cobbled together a kind of teaser trailer and sent it out, and that's when XYZ came on board. They saw that, and because we basically needed to pay for the 2 days of pickups we didn't have any money for. So I felt fairly confident that from what we'd shot there that we could get that extra money. It was but it was vital. I mean, we needed it. There would be no film without it. So
right.
Thank God they stepped in, and very quickly as well. They saw the teaser and they're like, oh, this looks great. How much do you need?
Yeah, and your trailer was amazing. I mean, when I saw that trailer, I was like, can I get the screener because this looks really amazing.
Yeah.
I think as filmmakers, you have to persevere.
Yeah.
Complete the film. Do what you got to do, and don't give up when it gets hard. And that's exactly what you did. You didn't give up.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I'm just reading at the moment. I'm reading the biography of Werner Herzog, and like his whole career is basically that. It's just like is not giving up in the face of extreme adversity, and what a career he's had, I think if you, especially if you want to like try and do something a bit different, and you will try and, it's hard, it's brutally hard, but it's really kind of like gratifying when you finish it and you get it done, and you're like, okay, this is it, and it is different, and why not?
Now, do you have any, what are you doing now? Any projects you want to mention as we close?
No, I mean, I'm working on, I have a new script here in front of me.
How far are you in?
I'm on the like 5th draft, actually.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and it's very, it's definitely one which I wrote with the idea of like, I really want to go back to the desert for a bit. So this one takes place in the city.
Nice. With people. Or isolated.
Nice nice warm studio. But it's still in the genre, and it's kind of, but more in the kind of body horror world. It's actually based in New York, and it's kind of, I don't know. I mean, Rosemary's Baby left such a big impression on me, and I always loved that. I mean, that's obviously in the Dakota building in the Upper West Side, but that kind of the Upper East and Upper West Side, that world, that storied world of wealth up there has always intrigued me. And so it kind of takes place in that world, but it's very much goes into the realms of Cronenbergian body horror. So it's fun.
All right.
Yeah.
What is your process like when you write? You said that you write a treatment first. Do you pretty much, when you're going into a story, your start to finish, or as you're writing your treatment, you are figuring out, how do you flow into figuring out what your story is? I think the hardest part is sometimes we can have these great ideas. Oh, I got these pivotal ideas, but how do you bring it into a whole thing? How do you work?
Yeah, when I'm doing the treatment, it generally the main plot beats, at least the ones you work off, I mean, they change obviously the whole time, but they tend to fall into place just with this kind of momentum which takes place when you're writing. You're like, okay, this leads here, that leads there, this is the obvious place for this to go. And it moves until you're finally like facing the end, and you're like, okay, well, I try not to be too technical about it and hit certain second act, page 30,
right,
or whatever. I try and be a bit more fluid than that. But I mean, it's helpful if you can be a bit like that, because those tools are there for a reason. They do actually help. But at the same time, like, I kind of just let the story tell itself as much as possible. I think if you can channel as much as you can, that's the way to do it. I feel like sometimes that leads into the wrong place, but I mean, this script, for example, The Seeding was never a long script. It was always, I think the longest version of it was like 95 pages or something like that, but at one point it was like 76 pages or something. It was never a long script. This new one, my first draft, was like 270 pages or something.
Wow.
It was really way too long, and which was just like, why? It was not on purpose. It was not like I want to go off and write this grand thing. It was nothing like that. It was really just that was just the way the story came out. Somehow it came out that way, and unfortunately it's giving me massive headache now because I'm trying to like corral it and bring it back and make it a little shorter and a little bit more like, you know, within that more classical structure, you know. But yeah, I don't like, but really, you know, it generally starts with a single idea or an image or like, or a feeling or, I mean, you mentioned the music a lot when we were talking, and I did have Tristan, the composer, I did have him, you know, we worked many times before. He's my cousin, like I said, and like, so I had the luxury of like, I think of, you know, very early drafts, sending him a script and him reading it. He's like, yeah, okay, I get this. And then, so then he started sending me music, and that kind of informed the process. And then I used that again later when I was casting. I was like, once I'd cast the movie, I sent the actors music. And so like, this is the world, listen to this is the world. And you'll get a better picture, a more fleshed out picture than just reading the script. And it's tremendously helpful. So music is important to me as well. I mean, not just the music that Tristan composed for the film, but there were a couple of other pieces of music that I was listening to incessantly when I was writing the seeding, would just really kind of took me to that place. And if I was ever a bit lost, it would guide me back, but really guide me to the kind of the feeling as opposed to the what should happen. I mean, you know, I obviously from doing music videos and just working so much in the music world before this, it's just very much like, that's how I work, you know, that's music is infused in the grammar, you know, the cinematic grammar from the very beginning. If you have that kind of luxury where you can work with a composer, and it's just such a fabulous tool to work with, you know, it can really just explain so much to everybody. Just like, this is the type of film we're making.
Yes.
Immediately. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking, do you listen to music, like you were saying, it's like you listen to songs and it just like brings that feeling of, and then can flow the ideas too. Like, oh, I love that. Yeah. So do you listen to music when you're writing, or do you have it quiet?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. I put it on in the background, generally pretty quietly, but I have it on and it's there, and it's kind of, not always, sometimes I have to turn it off. I find it distracting, but for the most part. And also another part of the process I sometimes have when I'm a bit stuck is I have this big folder on my laptop computer. There's like a folder which is basically images, and I've got about 4,000 images in there that I just have over the years just pulled off the internet, and it just, a lot of them photographs, paintings, just some artsy, you know, visual basically. And if I get lost, I will quite often, again, put on some music and just sift through that folder. And it's a mission, because it's like, it's like, you know, 4,000 images. It can take a day to go through it, but like, generally there's something in there. I'll see an image and maybe with the music, and it's just like, that will set off a whole, you know, you can get a whole film from that if you want to, or at least a scene or something, or a feeling. So that's another helpful tool that I have.
That is so great. I didn't even think about that. Images. Yeah. Any last thoughts you want to leave the listeners with on writing, directing?
Yeah, I've spoken about all the hardships and woes of shooting that I went through. And, you know, I should say that I'm tremendously grateful for that opportunity. It's like, it's so amazing to be in a situation where you get to do something that you love doing. It's really like, that's the greatest. And there, within those moments when you're on set and it's just the roof is falling in. It's just a disaster. It's this important to kind of like, I don't know, take a moment, like look at the sky, look where you are, look where you're at, look what you're doing, and just be like, and then go back to it knowing that like, yeah, this is what I wanted and this is what I love. And for me, yeah, wouldn't trade it for anything, even though it's really hard. Just got to keep going.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This was great.
Sure. Thank you, Tammy. It's been great.
Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to get out there and make a film. Reach out to your local filmmakers group to get involved and connect. Please subscribe to the show if you like it, and follow me on Instagram @TammyMcGarrow. Until we meet again, what's your story?